Ah, kia ora, te whānau. Welcome tonight to the Conscious Collective show. A little bit later than usual. It's been quite a day for me, and so we've kind of rushed around a little bit to be here tonight. But I'm so excited to have Hannah on the show tonight, and we've known each other kind of for a little while, and it's really nice to reconnect. So welcome.
Thank you. Kia ora.
There's a lot to chat about, but yeah. So we just talked just before I've gone through a very interesting day today. We are very proud, actually, and really excited as Conscious Collective to welcome in a local childcare centre called Kids Time here in my local Ngarawahia into our whānau, and we've literally done 14 interviews today as we've onboarded all the new staff into Conscious Collective. And this project is really special, and I'm going to be looking forward to sharing a little bit more with our whānau about what this means. But because it's local to Ngarawahia, it's really in the heart of Kingitanga, and the desire is to really honor the cultural stories and narratives of our local culture and bring that to life within the center. So I've literally gone on this amazing learning journey of connections in the last 2 months, and it's all starting to play out. So watch this space for sure. We met. I think I met your mum before I met you.
Yes.
Your mum, Thelma. She's just such a what's the word? A walking piece of wisdom. She is wonderful. She is just so genuine in her, and she's done so much for early childhood in Aotearoa. She was founder of Awhi Whānau, right? And a beautiful centre in Tamaki Makaurau, and where she weaved together the Reggio approach, which has inspired a lot of my practice, and Te Ao Māori, and also the Christian faith. And so I remember when I discovered her, when I heard that there was someone who was walking this path, I was so excited, and I learned so much from her. And it just makes a lot of sense that you're her daughter.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to hear a little bit of the legacy and what the work is that you're carrying on. So I think we'll start with, we met when you were working at the parenting place, and I remember meeting you, and I really enjoyed the work that Parenting Place was doing, but I thought there was a program called Building Awesome Whānau that seemed to be different to a lot of the parenting courses that were around. It seemed to be a little bit more connected and culturally responsive, and so it was to discover that you were playing a part in that was really interesting. So tell us a little bit about the work that you did there and what inspired you.
Sure. So I worked, I don't work for the Parenting Place anymore, but I was there for 3 years. And I was the national manager for Building Awesome Whānau. And I was given a huge privilege of being able to take a program that was already established and tailor it even more so that it would serve the aspirations of Māori. And so because of the community development background that I have through the work that I was involved with pretty much my whole life with Mum and Dad, we took it down that path of embedding a program for whānau that was designed for whānau, embedding it in local communities, so building the relationships with the local providers, because they know their whānau best, they know their community best and the complexities particular to that community. So began to shift it in that direction, and the response was really awesome. And that went hand in hand with prioritising whānau Māori, so that when they walk in the door, from the moment that they walked in the door, they felt comfortable. They felt that they could belong in that space. And so a lot of work went into training and for facilitator training, and went into contextualizing the material a little more. And we were given time to do that. So we were able to just slowly outwork that over a couple of years. So yeah, it had an awesome team of people and amazing people out there in the communities who guided us and journeyed it out with us. So yeah. But what led me to that work, just coming back to your question, was what I mentioned before about my mum and dad and growing up sort of in their work. They were ordained through the Brethren Church to work in community, so there was open Brethren, not exclusive Brethren, to be out in the community, and transformational community development was their thing, and it operated out of the home. It was always about the context of the home, that is the place of transformation. And so I grew up in that, and then through what I was exposed to, both in terms of a community development approach, but also in terms of the people who came to our home. So there were the people who came to live with us, and then there were people who were really influential in a different way, who a lot of them came from overseas, African American civil rights leaders like John Perkins from Mississippi, people from Africa, different countries within Africa. There's people who told these stories, and as a child, my mum and dad, we were always allowed to be present in the conversations. They didn't try to shield us from truth, even if the truth was hard to hear. Like the realities for John Perkins and the civil rights movement, and being, his brother being killed, and so on. They never shied away from letting us be exposed to that, but they insulated us and they supported us, and they said you can't isolate your children, but you can insulate your children, and they put that into practice. So being exposed to all of that just shaped me to be passionate about justice and reconciliation, because I met people who walked it out, who overcame massive odds to be able to reconcile with one another. So I figured if they could do it, we could too.
Yeah, that is beautiful. I think we should just delve right into that, because reconciliation, justice, we are in a moment right now of time where there's a lot more awareness about some of the injustices that's been to our minorities and Indigenous groups. And sometimes it can feel like reconciliation is a long way away, and that sometimes our differences feel bigger than ever, and sometimes it doesn't. What have you found to be some of the ways of knowing and being that helps us on this journey of reconciliation?
One thing is to remember that reconciliation is not a destination, it's a process. And so when you see reconciliation as a process, then you can also see the little wins along the way. And you can see how we're constantly being reconciled to something and from something. And when it comes to reconciliation, in order to know what we're being reconciled to, we need to be able to understand what we're being reconciled from. So this moment of time that we're in, people are growing an awareness of what we need to be reconciled from. So the injustices of white supremacy, the injustices of, well, here in Aotearoa as well, just things to do with the treaty and land confiscations and the battles that are still ongoing, overrepresentation and all of the negative statistics and so on. Like we need to be brave enough to see honestly what's here, and it's only once we do that we can begin to build different future together.
I'm going to lean into this at the expense of probably being a little bit uncomfortable and
uncomfortable. It's fine.
In your worldview, or the way that you see the world, or what you've learned in Aotearoa, what is it that we are being reconciliated from? Right? Like, what is the context that we find ourselves in? Because a lot of people would probably, like you said, just look at the statistics, and there's stereotyping and judgment without a true embodiment of an understanding and an empathy or a knowing. So can you just share with me what that is for you? What do you, how you see it?
Sure. So just to give some of the listeners a bit of context, my whānau is Māori and Irish. My mum is Irish, from Dublin. On my dad's side, we're Tuwharetoa. This is where I live, in Turangi, in the heart of the world, centre of the world, and also a Christian home. So those three things inform my worldview. So when you ask sort of what's that point, for me it begins with an understanding of what in Hebrew is described as shalom. So that in different languages and different revelations of what or equivalents of what shalom is, words like harmony, words like peace, that there is this inherent goodness in creation. And there's a whole lot of other stuff, but for me, the starting point is shalom, this inherent goodness and harmony. And I mean, I don't want to get too deep into the theology of that, but that's my starting point. In Aotearoa, and as Māori, there is an inherent goodness in being Māori. There is so much beauty in our culture, in our values, in Wairua. And the same is true of other ethnic cultures. There's this inherent goodness. And so I think that when we start with that, when we start with what works, when we start with what's good, there's a common ground there that we can share in, and we can relate to one another from.
Beautiful. And so what I like what you're saying is that more than story and history, you're also saying, let us see ourselves in each other. Let us see the goodness of each other in this present moment. Mm-hmm. And almost like let the connection and relationship be the pathway towards healing.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the mistakes that is often made is that we try so hard to differentiate ourselves from each other. How different I am from you. This is who I am. And in Māori way, we would say ko wai koe, like who are you? And that's about trying to find connection. And even if we just made that little shift and trying to figure out how we connect, is it through whakapapa? Is it through someone that we know in your town? Like in the conversation that we had before about the architects of the centre, like well, they're the architects for our iwi centre. You know, there's connection somewhere if we're willing to look for it. But sometimes we're in today's world we're a little bit fixated on defining ourselves as being different to one another. And I think that if we continue on that kind of trajectory, it can sometimes be problematic. It's hard to find connection. Mm-hmm. And I think ultimately that it's disconnection that creates the problems. Disconnection from each other, disconnection from what it is to love and to be loved. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that rings so true to me. And the more I've been pondering just upon the true essence of emotions, the idea that love moves us towards connection in each other, and fear moves us away towards separation. And those are kind of like the main players at work in kind of guiding us. And it's our pain of separation that causes so much of the suffering in the world, and so much of I suppose the violence in its same way is this idea that I am separate to you and that you are a threat to me, to my safety.
I love the word aroha, the kupu Māori. One of our kaumātua, George Eho, described aroha this way. He broke it down into aroaro, which means to turn toward, to take notice of, and ha, meaning the breath of life, when the first woman was created, and ha, the breath that brought her into life. So when you extend aroha to somebody, you treat them in such a way that they are caused to turn and take notice of ha, the essence of life. And then another explanation of aroha that I've been taught comes from our creation story, and you talked about separation. So the separation of rangi and papa, papa tuanuku, when she turned over at one point because of the separation, and Rangi's tears were falling, and so she turned over so that he wouldn't have to look upon her face. And aroha is in the phrase that he says to her, and it means to turn to me so that I might protect and promote your life force, your essence. And when we think about aroha in those terms, it means so much more than love. The word love that we can quite easily throw around. I love coffee. But to extend aroha to somebody is just, it's a whole nother level.
That sounds to me like truly allowing yourself to be seen and moving towards someone in the union and reconnection, almost the courage of vulnerability. To foster that connection and relationship. But that is the essence of all things. Relationship is all. Thank you so much for sharing that. That really hit deep in my spirit, for sure. If we can grasp that, and we can live through this concept or this notion of aroha, then I think reconciliation will follow.
Has to. And the thing is, it has to if both are doing it. If both are saying to me so that I might promote your life force, there is a selflessness in that, and a humility in that.
Coming back to some of these great social justice warriors, if we want to call them, or those who went through a lot of pain, and you grew up in your childhood having them in your home, and your parents being really active in that space. I have this reflection that I'd love your opinion on, but it seems to me that those who have been able to digest their grief to a point and stand from a place of somewhat of a place of healing has been the people who have been able to be the most influential in bringing reconciliation to the masses. I think of, in my hometown, Nelson Mandela, who spent that incredible time, so from South Africa, for those who don't know, but that incredible time in prison, and through those years had this metamorphosis of his heart that turned him from the anger, that digested the anger and the pain of the separation, even while he was at the suffering. And he came out and he said that we will, that peace is the way forward, and that we will be a united rainbow nation, he said, a place for everyone. I think Martin Luther King, Gandhi, people who have gone through tremendous suffering, but have in their own internal heart been able to digest some of that grief and stand strong. Has that been an observation, and it's a challenging observation, but what's your thoughts on that?
I mentioned John Perkins before. So they're from Mendenhall, Mississippi. And he was, he and a group of others were arrested, this is in the 60s, by the police from Jackson, which was the closest big city. And he was beaten beyond recognition. His skull was caved in. He nearly died. When his family went to get him, they didn't recognize him. He was so badly beaten. And he was taken to hospital. And he talked about how a white American male doctor would come at night once the family had left. And he would just sit on the end of the bed. And John talks about how he just hated that doctor. And everything in him wanted to kill him and seek vengeance for what the other police officers had done to him. But this doctor persisted and would just come at night and sit on the end of the bed until John fell asleep. And then he makes this statement. He said, "I then realized that we're just healing each other's wounds." And that pretty much sums it up for me. When it comes to grief and the pain of separation that you talk about, when we begin to see that in the other as well, it's not just, there's different kinds of pain and there's different kinds of grief, but we've all experienced it at some point. And it's reaching the point where we allow ourselves to see that in the other. But it's the allowing ourselves to see it, because it feels like we lose something of ourselves. We lose something of that righteous anger, perhaps, or the justice that we long for if we recognize the humanity of the other.
That's beautiful. That is so so powerful, even in the context of teamwork. Like our little teams in early childhood, the pain that we're just talking in general more about reconciliation of conflict and grievances, even from the most minute little things, little offenses to the major traumas. If we can empathetically see that we're all just kind of doing the best we can with what we've got. So tell me a little bit about what you're doing right now. What's the work that you're kind of involved with?
I'm wearing a couple of hats. One is with Te Ora Hou, which is a kaupapa Māori Christian youth development organisation. It's national. There's 5 national centres. It's been running in some places for coming on 40 years. Community-led development is their thing, but it's rangatahi and whānau in their local community. So each centre is autonomous. So my role is nationally just sort of facilitating things and to support that network of centres. And then my main piece of work is with a new trust that a group of us have established called Ngā Wai Hōhonu. And we have two work streams. One is, coming back. It's part of this whakapapa of Māori Christian, not to do with any particular church, just people who are Māori who wanted to understand more about how to be authentically Māori and authentically Christian when those things just seem so polar opposite to each other. And so there's this long whakapapa of that in our country and in our community. So this trust is just another continuation of different ventures that have come out of that community. So we are the partner for NAIITS, an Indigenous Learning Community, which operates in Canada, North America, Australia, and the Philippines, and provides master's and PhD level or postgraduate level qualifications. And it's about doing theology, but through an Indigenous lens, which is quite different.
It's interesting. And I wonder if we can delve a little bit into that, because you mentioned sometimes Māori, the idea of being authentically Māori and being authentically Christian can seem contrary. I know that definitely I had a Christian upbringing and spent much of my young adult life within the church life. And there was a resistance within me to fully embody and embrace Māori tikanga and mythology because of some of the lenses that was programmed into my mind. So I'm really intrigued to kind of like learn a little bit about your journey and what that's been like for you.
Sure. So like I said earlier, Māori, Irish families. My koro, my dad's dad, used to refer to God as matua, creator God, matua. And my Irish family, long history of faith and commitment to their faith. But growing up, those things never competed in my household or within me. There was an easy normal about that. It wasn't until I grew older that I realized that Christians were pretty hell-bent on pulling those things apart. And so the struggle for me has actually been about actively resisting that pulling apart. I am fortunate to have a family who both loves everything about the other. My koro, when I was 7, our family went to Ireland for the first time. And before I left, I asked my koro, do you want me to bring you anything back? Thinking like a tea towel or something. And he said, bring me back some soil because you are just as much from that whenua as you are from this. So all of me has always been affirmed. And in both Irish and Māori understandings of the world, everything is spiritual. So, yeah, there was an ease about all of it for me. Growing up in church, that was a different experience. As you say, there were many strains of theology that actively opposed being Indigenous, and that's not just in New Zealand, it's elsewhere. Cut your hair, drop the pounamu, don't drop the language. All those things were demonic and all of that kind of kōrero. But coming back to the point that I made before, I believe in the inherent goodness that is talked about at the very beginning of the very first book of the Bible. It is good, it is good, it is good. God says when he made creation. So there is an inherent goodness there. So when I also understanding that a lot of the theology that we've been exposed to has come from this tradition that is not, it's a Western tradition. It was impacted by the Enlightenment and all of those things. And this ugly word that keeps appearing in our screens of white supremacy, like there was a definite influence there that's traceable. And so deconstructing all of that in my adulthood has been a piece of work. But I'm fortunate to have a global Indigenous family who are doing similar work on themselves and understanding. So when you come to biblical texts and you have the freedom to look at that through your Indigenous lens, it's different. You interpret it differently. You see things because Jesus was a tribal Indigenous man. You see things there that you recognize. And it brings it to life in ways that were not possible before because we couldn't bring who we are. And the irony of all of the drop the pounamu, stop the language, all of that, was that there was this assumption that culture was evil, without even realizing that what they were doing was enculturating others. So I personally think that what we're going through, this moment in time that we're going through, it's a hard thing, but it's a good thing because the light is getting in to where there's been a lot of darkness. So, yeah.
It is. There's a couple of entry points there for me. It's I'm intrigued to know how you connect with tūrako or Māori mythology and kind of the creation stories and the many kind of like entities that holds so much relationship within Māori culture. Only because it's intriguing for me from from my past where that was probably seen as like, oh, God is the one God, and indigenous cultures have many gods, or Hindus have 700, so one is seen as right, the other is seen as wrong. Sure. And how you reconcile those within yourself.
If we believe that God created us, then there's intention in the design. I'm not Māori by accident. I'm not Irish and Māori by accident. It wasn't some lucky dip. And so with that as my starting point, I don't know if you're familiar with this quote, and I'm not going to be able to pronounce his name correctly, but it was one of the Catholic saints. He said, the glory of God is man fully alive. And so for me to pursue my Māoriness and my Irishness is to pursue God's design. It's to pursue the fullness of life that is utterly intended. And so however and to do that in this place and time, right? Like I was born in this place and time, and it's different to that of my grandparents. And so what it means for me to pursue life in all its fullness is to pursue what it looks like for me to be Māori and Irish and a mother located here in Aotearoa, specifically Turangi at this time. It's when it comes to Whakatōhea, again, growing up in, so I grew up in, my parents were leaders in this movement called the World Christian Gathering on Indigenous People. Every 2 years we would go to a different country hosted by the Indigenous people there, and it's just a celebration of song and dance and language and a reclamation of those things as people who follow the Jesus way. So it was never, it was just this strange thing where I had this other world where all of those things were fully embraced and expressed, and also the lament that came from having those things denied. All of that was present. It's never been difficult for me to sit with our pūrākau, with Atuatanga, but mostly because I believe that there is a revelation of God in it. Like God is in all things, Creator is in all things. We talk about Māori, we talk about Wairua, like it just makes sense in my head. And it makes sense from the experiences that I've had, that there is this persistent presence in all of creation that binds it all. And some call it love. So
Aroha.
Aroha.
I'm gonna again, we're gonna just camp here for a second, and because words like God, Christian, can bring up a lot of emotion in a lot of different people, and I recognize that because of our own experiences, right? Whether you were brought up on Catholic stools, or whether you were brought up completely as with a lot of resistance towards religion. All those things are present when we utter those words God. It's like this. Did we just bring that into the conversation? Now, Te Whāriki talks about the holistic well-being of the child, integrating the emotional, the physical, the mental, and the spiritual. And within the context of Aotearoa, and mainly really our European heritage that has become divorced from religion to a large extent, we have struggled to really interpret what it means to foster the spiritual well-being of our tamariki, or even ourselves.
Yeah.
And I'm interested to know, to kind of have you just talk to us a little bit about what spiritual well-being means for you.
One of the temptations of our society is to compartmentalize. So even with Masonjury's wharetapa whā, as an attempt to identify these different taha, in practice, a lot of people still compartmentalize it. I'm going to do this for my body today. I'm going to do this for my whānau today. And whilst it's helpful to understand, it's necessary to understand the interconnectedness of it all, and the interconnectedness of wairua in the everyday. We're spiritual beings. My daughter, she sees things, and I don't mean like literally sees things, but she has this way of seeing that I forget as an adult. And she's 13 now, but she reminds me to slow down and to see the things that she's seeing. Like recently, our chicken died, and I was like all about just dig a hole, put the chicken in the ground, and she's like, no. So we had to go through this whole tangi kind of experience for her, where she could mahi to the chicken and thank it for its life and thank it for its eggs. That's wairuatanga. And so when we think about the environments that we create in our early childhood centres and contexts, how do we create environments that allow children to connect with life and in the life forms? How do we, perhaps it is a chicken, but whenua, how do we create environments that let the children explore naturally, experience seasons, experience cycles, natural cycles? All of that is this connectedness. We think about, if we think about attachment theory, right, it's person to person from a Western mind. But for an Indigenous mind, it's person to person, but it's also, as Māori, it's to my whenua, it's to my maunga. There's attachment to my awa, there's attachment to my whakapapa, those who've gone before me. So when we think about that, how do we with the children that you guys are working with, how do you invite that kind of thinking into the everyday things? Like if people have portfolios, how do we invite that into portfolios? When they want to identify who their family is, like who's in it? Is the dog in it? Is the chicken in it? Is there a special place that they like to go to where they just have some time by themselves and it's a place that restores them? How do they bring that into who they are, and that's welcome in the centre? From a very young age, as Māori, you learn real quick to conform. We walk into worlds. So early childhood teachers have this unique opportunity to show children, to teach children to either conform or to belong. And one way that Māori children over all of these, over 100 and however many years, have had to conform is to lose that we just described before. Don't bring the spiritual here. And so we see things change, like with karakia, starting the day with karakia, having karakia before kai. There's all of those rituals and practices as well. And I think there's a way to let the children lead, and let them express, to express what they are feeling within their wairua, and to not be afraid of where that might go.
I love how Māori language has clues to the worldview, right? With wairua, wai being water and rua, tu is this indication that there's always two rivers flowing in everything and in all of us, of both ranganui and papatuanuku, of both the sky, the spirit, and the flesh and the earth. And I love how tani mahuta is an energy it's a relationship that we have, and hidden within all of the ways of being and seeing is that we are all connected, both to the past, the present, the future, both to the earth, to the elements, and to each other. So it makes so much sense that if we do not embrace spirituality in our settings, we are asking Māori and let's be honest, most of our children to conform to a way of being that's not really innate in our nature. So that's such an interesting perspective.
And I don't know if you're familiar with the book Aroha's Way.
No.
Do you know the book? New Zealand author, and it's an excellent book. And it just follows the story of this little girl, Aroha, who's trying to just sort of manage her emotions. And I was reading it to my nieces, they're 6 and 7, and they go to Kaiwhakauruora. And as we were going through the story, Aroha goes out into the forest and she listens to the trees moving in the wind. And I asked them, what do they think that meant? And they responded by saying, oh, she's with Tāne, she's in Te Whāriki Mahuta. So when you go there, then you can feel the trees and the wind and tāwhiri mātea, and they're making sense of it in their worldview. And then they talked about how she can then move into rongo, the realm of rongo, and be at peace. But they knew it, they understood it. That they could interpret the story through their worldview, through their spirituality. And sometimes those are scary conversations for some teachers. And that's why I come back to saying, let the children lead it. It doesn't have to be scary.
It's so true. I'm just reflecting back on my children and their journey. And before bed, often when they were little, and sometimes we still do it now, we would just close our eyes and my parents always prayed with me before bed. And I always remember lying in bed, and that was so comforting, to kind of connect into the idea that I am universally held. And so I throughout my life, in my spiritual growth and learning, I've also learned that imagination and kind of that sense of intuition is the whispers of the gods, right? Like it's where imprints kind of get made. And so I'd get them to close their eyes, and I'd say, let's close your eyes and imagine that you're in a field. And then I'd say, what's happening in the field and who's there? And they would start telling me these stories of, I'm in this field and the angels are around me. And all my friends are there and we're on the swing. And this is what God is telling me. And this is what, and they would just naturally begin to make sense and tell me, like it's just normal, about their place in the world. It's within us all, that spiritual flame of connectivity to the all is within us, and it is we unlearn this very quickly throughout our life, don't we?
Yeah.
So I completely agree with you. Like if we listen to our children, they will lead it.
And it's an opportunity too, that my mum often talks about teachable moments. So when we let the children lead, there's an opportunity for us to experience our own teachable moments when we get those feelings of like, oh, where's this going? Or, examine that. Why are we reluctant to let this carry on? Why does this make me feel uncomfortable?
It's actually that awareness of the reluctance. I mean, that's the gift right there. If we can become aware of our resistance to anything, we know that we've hit a wall of our programming, and being curious about that.
Yes.
Why is this uncomfortable for me?
It's interesting. I was reading this book by T.D. Jakes on intuition, and he talks about how intuition as an adult is formed by first as a child being able to imagine, and the role of imagination in your childhood and what that can lead to as an adult. And I was when I was reading that book, I was having a conversation with my dad around the same time and talking about what happened here in Turangi in the 60s when the Crown took the land and they confiscated the land and they bulldozed it was like a bit hilly, and they bulldozed the town to make it, or the area to make a town. And Dad was describing this one little area where they used to roll down the hill, and he said it's the place where our imaginations came alive, and then they bulldozed it. And I was thinking about that in the context of T.D. Jakes' comment about imagination, and I wondered about the impact of that on our people, where the places where their imagination could go wild was taken away, and how these things get stunted in us through, in Dad's case, the annihilation of the whenua. But in other cases, what stunts imagination, and then the long-term effect of that into our adulthood, where we don't trust our intuition, we don't let it lead, we don't listen carefully to it, we don't respond with curiosity, and the role that teachers have, early childhood teachers have to protect that imagination, and to nurture it and stoke it so that they have confidence in it as they move on to primary school and what have you.
The Reggio approach has this phrase, the pedagogy of listening. Should just be like a phrase for life.
Yes.
Pedagogy of listening deeply, listening with all your senses, listening again, listening and listening again to the whispers, the intuitions, the movements of the children, to really be present with them and not to try and enforce where learning should go or what we should do. And I think my sense is that when we truly become present with children and we operate from that notion of ako, really that they are our teachers and that we are the learners, that we will discover a world within us that we lost long ago. We will discover the imaginations of the spirit that was alive within us before we got shut down. And so if that is something that we can go away with tonight, then let's listen again.
Yeah, agreed.
Let's listen to our children. We're nearly out of time with our conversation tonight. I wanted to kind of bring it just back to this time and place that we're in right now. And what do you think is the appropriate response of kaiako or New Zealanders right now to what's happening in the world with Black Lives Matter?
I think there's multiple responses, as long as there's a response. Often, we're talking about spirituality, and often our spirituality becomes privatized, and we see something happen, we see an injustice, and our response is to not hold anger in our heart, or to maintain peace or shalom through the moment. And it's privatized to such an extent that we don't actually do anything about the systemic causes of the injustice. We just maintain the standard. And so there's a caution there that I think Black Lives Matter is illuminating. We can't just do the work on ourselves. There must be systemic change. So it's not an either or, it's the both and. We need to do the work on ourselves. We need to act on systemic change. And I know that here in New Zealand, so I worked at Awhi Whānau, Mum's Early Childhood Centre, for 7 years. And one of the questions that was often asked of us as a bicultural bilingual centre was, but why should we respond the same way when we don't have any Māori children in our centre, or families in our community, Māori families in our community? And my response to that would be, you're already part of the story by being here in this whenua. You're part of the story. And so it's up to each of us how we respond to that. To not do something as a response. So yeah, we have choice. We have choice about how we engage it, how we have brave conversations. Sometimes we want the safe ones, but the brave ones are productive. Listen carefully to what is going on in your community. Like you talked about at the beginning, it's about relationships. Find out the stories that are in the places where you are. The stories, what happened to mana whenua there in Auckland, around the Waikato, why are there no old whare there? What happened? Get curious. And with a humility, like you said before, listen really well. And then in the listening, you'll find out a good way for you to be able to respond within your context.
It's interesting that you just talk about like listening to local stories. We just in the subdivision that I live, they're looking to extend it here in Ngāwai, and I noticed just around COVID that there were some protests happening just at the edge of it with some Māori whānau, and I kind of, it's like, oh, I've got to go and connect and see what's going on. And there was probably a little bit of fear, a bit of resistance. And then just the other day, I took my my youngest, and we just went to, we walked up there and we just sat under the marquee that they've constructed, and I said, I really want to understand what happened, or what's this kaupapa about. And I met with Dawson, and Dawson told me about the food pits and the pa that was here in Ngāwai, and he just began to tell me the richest story of Waikato and the abundance of pre-colonial Waikato. We sat there for so long. I found out actually that some of my children actually know some of these stories because of their school, and I thought that was so cool. Yeah. But it illuminated in me this unseen history of abundance, of mana as well for mana whenua. And I think everyone pushing past their fear barriers and just asking, hey, tell me, can I listen, not needing to fix anything or do anything. That in itself became a really interesting moment for me. And it's really connected me to this place. And, I think that word allyship kind of gets thrown around a little bit, and it becomes a bit of a thing of like, how do I become an ally? And it's maybe not the intention, but the intention is just how do you serve reconciliation the best from place. So yeah, I think it's really rich.
And I absolutely, I really encourage Pākehā New Zealanders as well to find out their own whakapapa. Like the construct of race and whiteness and so on. Like, people aren't white. That's not a thing. It's a construct. So who are you? What's your background? Where are your people from? Because it's in me knowing who I am and you knowing who you are that we find that common ground that we talked about at the beginning. Yeah, and it can be a bit of an adventure.
I love that. I think it's more than just a genealogy.com kind of venture. It's something that really does connect you into time and place.
Absolutely.
And thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.
Late on a Wednesday evening. It's been really lovely to have this kōrero. You've just reflected back so much depth in the way that you see the world, and I really do appreciate that.
No, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Have a lovely evening, and say big hugs to your mum for sure, your mum and dad.
I will. It's her birthday tomorrow, so we're going to go and celebrate.
Awesome. Yeah. Wonderful. Okay.
Thanks, Rick. Māori.
Ka kite anō. Bye-bye.